The black boy was shot after calling 911. No one knew he was the son of a congresswoman. He was shot while trying to save someone's life. Not robbing, not resisting, not threatening, just holding a phone and crying for help. 12-year-old Marcus Hill had only ever seen blood in video games. That changed the day his best friend collapsed beside him on a cracked sidewalk in South Baltimore. A bullet lodged in his chest from a drive-by no one saw coming. Marcus didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees, pressed his trembling hands against Jamal's wound like he'd seen on YouTube, and dialed 911 with the other. "Help," he sobbed. "My friend's been shot. Please. I'm at 12th and Hollister, by the basketball court. Please hurry." They told him help was on the way. He didn't know that help would come armed. When Officer Trent Mallory pulled up, his siren still screaming, he saw two black boys, one bleeding, the other crouched over him with something in his hand. He didn't wait to assess. He didn't wait to shout a warning. He didn't even step out of the cruiser. 3 shots rang out. Marcus's scream was drowned by the final bullet tearing into his shoulder. The phone hit the pavement before he did. He lay on the ground, eyes wide, confusion and pain twisting through his small frame. His voice, so full of urgency just moments before, was now a whisper. "I was calling for help." The officer approached cautiously, gun still drawn, before realizing the weapon was a cracked smartphone and the bleeding boy was unarmed. By then, it was too late. Marcus was alive, but barely. An ambulance finally arrived, and both boys were rushed to the hospital. That night, a nurse at Johns Hopkins Medical Center made the call. She didn't know she was speaking to a sitting member of Congress. She only knew the boy in surgery had a mother listed as Congresswoman Lila Hill, Washington, D.C. 2 hours later, the ICU waiting room fell silent as she walked in. Black heels, black pantsuit, eyes that burned like acid behind her glasses. She didn't cry when the surgeon said Marcus had lost a lot of blood. She didn't shake when he said he'd likely survive, but with nerve damage. She didn't blink when the nurse tried to offer comfort. But when she stepped into his hospital room, saw her son's tiny hand wrapped in gauze, and the oxygen mask puffing against his bruised face, her knees buckled. That night, the Capitol heard a scream that didn't come from the floor of Congress. It came from a mother in room 214, Johns Hopkins ICU. Lila didn't just want answers. She wanted names. By the next morning, every national news outlet was circling the story. Black boy shot by police after calling 911. But none of them knew he was the son of Congresswoman Hill. Not yet. She didn't release a statement. She didn't tweet. She waited. Because she knew something no one else did. Marcus had recorded the whole thing. The phone, still intact despite the blood and pavement cracks, had captured his final moments before the shot. "Please help him," the audio recorded. "He's bleeding. I think he's dying. Please hurry." Then, the screech of tires, the pop of 3 bullets, and Marcus's agonizing scream. The phone ended the recording on impact. The timestamp? For minutes before backup ever arrived. Lila stared at that screen until the numbers blurred. She'd spent years writing legislation about police reform. She'd given interviews, debated on the House floor, marched, donated. But all it took was one man's fear of a little black boy with a phone for all her policies and power to become irrelevant. Now it was personal. Didn't end when Marcus went into surgery. It ended when the world found out whose son he was. Lila walked into the press room at 10 a.m. on Monday, flanked by 2 lawyers and her chief of staff. She didn't wear black this time. She wore white. The same color they had buried her mother in. The same color that made people squint, not soften. "My name is Lila Hill," she said into the sea of microphones. "And I'm not here as a politician. I'm here as a mother. My 12-year-old son was shot by a police officer while calling 911 to save his friend's life. He was holding a phone. He was kneeling beside a bleeding child. And for that, he was treated as a threat. No one moved. His name is Marcus Hill," she continued. "You know my name, but now you will learn his." The recording was played in full, unedited. The silence afterward was thick enough to smother a city. She didn't ask for justice. She demanded it. That same day, Officer Trent Mallory was placed on administrative leave. Within 48 hours, the Baltimore Police Department released a vague statement, "Regrettable incident under internal investigation." But that wasn't enough. Not for Lila. Not for Marcus. Not for every mother who ever feared her child wouldn't come home from school just because of his skin. She filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. She requested body cam footage from every responding officer. She demanded DOJ oversight of the BPD's response protocols. And she wasn't alone. Protesters flooded the streets, not with fire but with phones. Thousands of them, held high, recording, watching. Signs read, "A phone is not a gun. Marcus could be my son. Protect black kids." But not everyone was on her side. Trolls flooded her inbox. Maybe teacher kid not to act like a thug. He probably looked suspicious. You should be grateful he survived. Grateful? Lila wanted to break her computer. Instead, she printed those comments out. She brought them to the House floor. She read them aloud. And then she asked the chamber, if Marcus had been white, would you be asking me to be grateful? No one answered. Because everyone already knew. Marcus didn't speak for 5 days. Not because he was unconscious, but because he was afraid. He woke up the second night after the shooting, eyes wide, gasping like he was underwater. The nurses had told Lila he'd be disoriented, maybe panicked. But he wasn't panicked. He was silent. He looked at the ceiling, then at his bandaged shoulder, then at his mother. Did he die? He whispered. Lila's heart cracked. No, baby. Jamal's alive. He's in another room. He made it. Marcus nodded once, then closed his eyes again. The psychologist said it was trauma. Lila already knew. He didn't want to talk not about the officer, not about the sirens, not even about the pain. What haunted him the most was that, deep down, he thought he had done something wrong. Day 6, he finally spoke. Not to Lila, but to a nurse named Tamika who sang to him while changing his four. My teacher always said call 911 if there's an emergency, he whispered. But I did, and they shot me. Tamika froze mid-hum. I was trying to help Jamal, he added. I didn't even drop the phone. That night, Lila sat at his bedside and cried for the first time since the hospital. Not as a congresswoman, not as a fighter, but as a mom who couldn't promise her son he'd be safe next time. The pressure from Washington was mounting. The president called Weiss. He offered condolences, then publicly condemned the alarming trend of excessive force toward black youth. He never said Marcus's name, but he didn't have to. By now, the country knew every detail of the case. Police unions pushed back, hard. Fox News questioned whether Marcus had really followed instructions. Online conspiracy theorists claimed the phone in his hand looked like a weapon. Commentators tried to spin the angle, tragic mistake, but understandable in a dangerous city. Lila didn't argue. She showed them. 1 week after Marcus was discharged from the hospital, still in a sling and walking slow, she brought him back to the sidewalk where it happened. She didn't invite press, but they came anyway. Marcus stood quietly beside his mother in front of the memorial that had grown overnight: balloons, flowers, posters with his face, Jamal's face, and the words "Justice for Black Boys" painted across the bricks. Lila faced the cameras. This is where it happened. Not in a dark alley. Not in a gang shootout. Right here, across from a school, in broad daylight. She stepped aside. Marcus has something he wants to say. He didn't use the prepared speech. He just looked at the crowd and said, I called 911. I did what you're supposed to do. I didn't yell. I didn't run. I had my phone, and I stayed with my friend. That's all. Then he turned to Lila and asked if they could go home. That moment went viral in less than an hour. But so did something else. Body cam footage leaked from within the department. It showed Officer Mallory arriving, pulling his gun while still in the cruiser, shouting "Drop it," without ever identifying what it was, and firing less than 3 seconds later. There was no threat, no hesitation, no humanity. The footage sparked national outrage. Protests swelled. Cities as far as Oakland, Chicago, and Atlanta held candlelight vigils. For a moment, America held its breath just like it did after Tamir, after Trayvon, after too many others. But this time, something changed. Because this time, the boy wasn't just a victim, he was a child of power. Lila stood on the floor of the House and introduced legislation titled the Marcus Act, Mandatory Accountability in Response to Civilian Use of Force Scenarios. The act proposed federal penalties for departments that failed to discipline officers involved in the wrongful shooting of minors. It demanded real-time DOJ investigations. It required trauma support for child victims of police violence. And most controversially, it withheld federal police funding for any department that failed to enact proper de-escalation training. She introduced it with one hand on her son's medical report, and the other on his blood-stained hoodie. The opposition was fierce. One senator called it emotional overreach. Another claimed it would demonize law enforcement. Lila didn't flinch. She held up the bullet that doctors had removed from Marcus's shoulder. "This," she said, voice steady, "is what overreach looks like." Meanwhile, the internal affairs investigation quietly concluded. Officer Trent Mallory was fired. Not arrested, not charged, just terminated. The mayor called it the first step toward healing. Lila called it cowardice. She held a press conference the next morning. "My son was nearly killed," she said. "If Marcus were white, Officer Mallory would be in jail. But because he's black, and because this country has a long history of excusing fear as justification, he gets to walk away." She looked directly into the camera. Not this time. A new federal investigation began under pressure from voters, activists, and lawmakers. The Department of Justice opened a civil rights case. This time, they didn't just investigate Mallory. They began auditing the entire Baltimore Police Department. Whistleblowers came forward. So did old case files. Complaints that had been buried, videos that had been edited, testimonies never followed up. It was bigger than Marcus. And that's what Lila wanted all along. It started with one mother's pain and ended with the country's reckoning. 3 months after Marcus was shot, Officer Trent Mallory stood trial in federal court. The charge, violation of civil rights under color of law. The courtroom was packed. Cameras were banned, but reporters scribbled every moment like gospel. Lila sat in the front row. Marcus, finally ready, sat beside her. No sling, no bandage, but the scar still showed, just above the collar of his shirt. He didn't try to hide it. The prosecution was relentless. They played the body cam video in full, again and again. Every time, the room grew quieter. The audio was damning. The way Mallory shouted, "Drop it." The fear in Marcus's voice. The shot. The silence. The echo of a phone hitting the pavement. Marcus flinched each time. The defense tried everything. They argued protocol, stress, fear, split-second decisions. They said the officer thought Marcus was holding a weapon. They tried to paint the city as a war zone and Mallory as a soldier doing his job. But then Marcus took the stand. He stood straight, calm, clear. "I called 911 because my friend was bleeding and couldn't breathe," he began. "I held the phone with both hands so I wouldn't scare anyone. I even said, 'I'm on the phone with 911,' right before he shot me." The courtroom froze. "I didn't scream. I didn't run. I did what I was taught to do. But I got shot anyway." A pause. "I used to want to be a firefighter. Now I don't want to wear any uniform. Not if people will be afraid of me for no reason." A juror wiped her eyes. When he stepped down, even the judge looked rattled. The jury took 2 days to deliberate. The verdict, guilty. The room exploded into sobs, gasps, and clenched fists finally released. Mallory showed no emotion. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Not the maximum, but more than many expected. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. It was acknowledgement. Lila didn't celebrate. She sat still, tears running silently. After the verdict, reporters flooded her again. "Congresswoman, how do you feel?" She looked at the mic, then at her son. "I feel like a door just opened. A door that's been locked for far too long. But that door led to something unexpected. Because Marcus quiet, thoughtful Marcus had something else in mind." A few weeks after the trial, he asked to speak at a citywide youth summit on policing and public safety. He didn't write a speech. He didn't rehearse. He just walked up to the mic and told the truth. "I used to think the world was fair," he said. "Now I know it's not. But I also know we can fix it. Not by yelling louder. Not by fighting harder. But by making it impossible to ignore us." He looked around the room of teens, many wearing hoodies just like his. "They tried to erase me. But I'm still here. So I'm going to build something better." Lila watched from the wings, hands clasped. After his talk, she asked him what he meant. He smiled. "I want to make things safer. For kids like me." "How?" He shrugged. "I think I want to be a lawyer." That spring, the Marcus Act passed the House. Barely. But it passed. The Senate took longer. The fight was brutal. But a video of Marcus speaking went viral again, and under national pressure, it finally cleared with a razor-thin majority. The Marcus Act became law. It changed things. Federal oversight increased. Training was restructured. Civilian review boards were empowered. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But fewer kids got hurt. Fewer families were shattered. More officers thought twice. And for Marcus, it meant something even bigger. He got to be a kid again. Not a victim. Not a symbol. Just a boy who liked coding, history, and bike rides with Jamal, who had also fully recovered and now referred to Marcus as Superman. 10 years later, Marcus walked across the graduation stage at Harvard Law School. The crowd roared when Lila called his name. He didn't look back. He looked forward. He already had offers from prestigious firms, clerking jobs, advocacy groups. But he accepted none of them. Instead, he returned home and opened a nonprofit legal center called the 9/11 Project. Its mission: to protect young people who interact with law enforcement, ensure their rights are respected, and train them to become advocates for themselves and their communities. One wall of the office displayed a framed printout of his original 911 call transcript. Another held a photo of him in a hospital bed, bandaged, with Lila holding his hand. And above his desk, bold and centered, was a quote he wrote himself. "I called for help and got hurt. Now I answer that call for others." That quote spread across social media. Schools began inviting him to speak. Cities started adopting his training programs. One police chief publicly admitted, "This kid is doing more for public safety than most of us in uniform ever have." Marcus never sought revenge. He didn't need to. He got something stronger: redemption, resolution, and the power to rewrite the story. And as for Lila, she ran for Senate the following year. She won in a landslide. In her first speech, she held up her son's hoodie and said, "This was once evidence of suspicion. Now it's a badge of change." The black boy was shot after calling 911. No one knew he was the son of a congresswoman. Was no longer just a headline. It was a lesson, a movement, a turning point, and a name no one would ever forget. Marcus Porter, the boy who survived Dan, then built something better from the ashes.